uyabona inkinga yakhona ukuthi nivimbile lapha khona abantu abahlukumezekile niyakina niyovimba manje la kufika amagadaphi la khona abantu abahlukumezekayo ngiyaqeda lapha siyabuya sizala ngisabalekile siyayazi umkhuba yayo so ingakho sengile engicasulayo kakhulu yilokuthi kuthi masevinjiwe la insizwa zelezi niziqashile sibenzela nini simasifika sikhuluma zithi amane ukhuluma nekhulu izona esiyasizela bese sithatha imoto ke ngithi ngivime ngapha nangapha ngiziqoqa lezi imoto bayalwa football uyayizwa la angeke kufike uphula umthetho amaphoyisa mathi ayasebenza bese futhi uphindulisa amaphepha shuthi masukulisa amaphoyisa ke acaci ukuthi sekuyimpi asilweni hayi asebi ba asimisele ngokulwa nayo so sivumelene ukuthi ngesonto ngizokuthina kutshela isikhathi ngizoconfirm isikhathi during the day.
He was a man both feared and feted, a taxi boss whose name opened doors and tilted the balance of power on Pretoria's busiest ranks. They called him Mswazi. To some, he was a negotiator who wanted to professionalize an industry that moves millions every day. To others, he was a man who lived in the shadow of violence, surrounded by rivalries and whispered plots. This is the story of how Jothan King Mswazi Msibi rose to power in Pretoria's taxi world, how his empire shaped roots across the city, and how his sudden death left unanswered questions. South Africa's minibus taxi industry is the country's informal public transport backbone. Every day, millions of commuters board these 16-seaters. But behind the choreography of fares and routes lies an economy where millions of rand flow, alliances are forged and broken, and the cost of control is counted in threats and bullets. Mswazi's rise mirrors that of many taxi magnates, starting small, learning the rules of the road, and slowly converting influence into institutional control. He became indispensable, not only by owning taxis, but by positioning himself inside the governing structures of the industry. He held senior positions in taxi associations and was linked to SANTACO and Taxi Choice. In industry terms, that's a potent mix. Control of routes plus a seat at the table where decisions are made. To drivers and smaller operators, Mswazi smoothed disputes, negotiated with officials, and secured access to municipal ranks. To prospective partners, he offered stability and protection, an authority that could secure a route and exclude rivals. Taxi associations operate like cartels in many ways. They regulate who uses which route, determine rank fees, approve replacement minibuses, and mediate pay disputes. For bosses like Mswazi, the associations are levers of influence. If you control a rank or sway a licensing decision, you don't just earn in fares, you command a system. But power has two faces. While many remembered Mswazi as someone who sought a professional, respected taxi industry, the system that made him wealthy also drew him into rivalries and danger zones. What made Mswazi rich was the same thing that makes every successful transport boss wealthy: control. Control over fleet size, over who drives where, over rank access, and over contracts to supply services. Taxi bosses profit from direct fares and from ancillary revenue streams. Rank levies, route protection payments, vehicle repair monopolies, and relationships with business people and politicians who value reliable shuttle services. A busy Pretoria rank can see hundreds of passengers a day. Collectively, a well-managed fleet turns turnover into significant cash flows. For a boss with dozens of taxis, aggregate income can reach 6 or 7 figures per month. Across networks and provinces, fortunes are made and influence spreads. With money comes enemies. In Mswazi's world, rivalry was almost institutionalized. The narrative is peppered with names and clashes: Joe, Ferrari, Sibagnoni, and other bosses who contested routes or alliances. The taxi industry is an archipelago of competing power centers. Where routes overlap, friction forms. Where money is at stake, arrangements are fragile. Friction can be bureaucratic. Lawyers, court papers, petitions for transport authorities, or it can erupt into violence. Over the years, Pretoria saw attempted killings, threats, and alleged plots linked to heavyweight figures. In some cases, even the family became entangled. Decades-old reports mention arrests and sworn statements by would-be hitmen describing internal intrigue. It's a reminder that the taxi world doesn't always separate the personal from the political. Another axis of power came from tenderpreneurs, individuals who win government contracts and who sometimes operate in grey zones between business, politics, and crime. In Pretoria's interwoven scene, Mswazi's name appeared alongside such figures, suggesting alliances and shared interests. When a figure rises, the public record becomes a sieve. For Mswazi, it holds contradictions. On the one hand, he was lauded for his leadership. On the other, serious allegations and murky plots peppered his public life. Old reports reference a case roughly 2 decades earlier where family members and associates were implicated in a plot to threaten him and his relatives. Another high-profile moment was when state security figures publicly named him in the context of threats, accusations large in scope and difficult to verify. The mere presence of such allegations shaped perception, a leader who moved between respectability and suspicion. Court filings connected him indirectly to conflicts with other bosses, details that emerged during prosecutions of third parties. One recurring theme is the mobility of evidence. Vehicles, addresses, and names cropping up across different incidents. For journalists and prosecutors, establishing causality, who ordered what and why, is one of their toughest battles. Yet allegations are not convictions. A careful account must distinguish between accusation, affidavit, and proven fact. In Mswazi's case, some claims remained unresolved. That grey zone fuels the tension in the story. A respected leader in public, a suspect in private whispers. On 7th January 2024, Jothan King Mswazi Msibi died at a Tshwane hospital after what papers called a short illness. His death was sudden enough to be labelled untimely by colleagues and mourners. The memorial that followed drew representatives from dozens of taxi associations, a testimony to the scale of his influence. Even in death, the narrative remains complicated. His funeral was a conventional farewell for an industry patriarch, but beneath the official praise, questions persisted. What was the precise cause of his illness? Were there forces beyond illness? Who would now step into the vacuum of leadership? Funerals often consolidate memory and provoke opportunism. For rivals and hungry upstarts, a king's passing can be the signal to strike. For the industry, it posed pragmatic questions. Who would manage the delicate balance of route allocations? Which alliances would solidify and which would splinter? Reports since his death suggest a mixture of continuity and contest. Some of his followers sought to keep his structures intact. Others moved to redefine connections and capture routes. The taxi sector is adept at adaptation. Where one hand withdraws, many hands reach in. The consequence is usually a period of instability. For commuters, the difference is practical: safer ranks or more dangerous ones. How should Mswazi be remembered? He leaves behind a legacy that contains both constructive and corrosive elements. Constructively, He was a builder of institutions within the taxi industry, someone who sought to formalize relationships and bring negotiating power to drivers and operators. He championed the idea that the taxi industry could be treated as a legitimate stakeholder in urban mobility. For many, he was a provider and protector. But alongside those aims, the patterns of rivalry suggest a darker reality. The same structures which yield profitability may also harbor coercion. When control is enforced by intimidation or violence, legitimacy is compromised. The taxi economy is enormous and inherently political. That makes bosses like Mswazi both civic actors and quasi-feudal lords, depending on how the power is used. His life also forces us to confront how communities narrate leadership. In funerals and memorials, the emphasis was on the man who unified. In court dockets and police files, the emphasis shifts. The truth often sits in both accounts. Leaders are rarely wholly one thing. After a powerful boss passes, the most interesting activity is not the funeral itself, but the months that follow, the jockeying, the deals, the murders that sometimes appear in the margins. In Pretoria, those months brought movement. Senior drivers and junior bosses began to reposition. Associations renegotiated dominance at key ranks. Old rivals saw openings. Allies consolidated. For a content creator or an investigator, this is the phase rich with material. The stories of new leaders, the conflicts that flared at particular junctions, and the ways the industry tried, successfully or unsuccessfully, to hold the peace. It's also the phase where public policy can matter most. If municipal authorities respond with transparent reallocation processes and better policing, instability can be contained. If they do not, a slide into violent contention is possible. Stories like Mswazi's matter because they humanize systems. Behind the numbers of taxis and the headlines about arrests are people, drivers who risk their lives on dangerous ranks, passengers who fear leaving late at night, families whose earnings depend on a steady route. The human cost of a power struggle is not abstract. It's measured in funerals, in quiet fear, and in livelihoods disrupted. An industry that is essential to a nation's mobility cannot be left to informal power alone. Regulation must be fair, transparent, and enforced. Municipal authorities must be capable and honest. Policing must target the criminality that poisons markets without criminalizing the entire industry. The taxi sector's potential for good, to deliver mass mobility affordably, will remain compromised if control continues to be contested in the shadow economy. Jothan, King Mswazi Msibi, was in many ways a symbol, a man who embodied both the promise and the peril of the taxi industry. Loved by many, mistrusted by others, his life reads like a parable of modern urban economies, where opportunity and threat walk side by side. His death did not end the story. It changed the shape of it. And the taxi ranks of Pretoria, noisy, crowded, and humming with the everyday commerce of the city, remain the stage where the next acts will be played out. New alliances, new conflicts, and new leaders who will inherit both the roots and the risks.